The conversation slowly darkened, but that wasn't such a rare occurrence. We would talk about death fairly often. I mean, after all, we did hang out in cemeteries regularly. For the most part, we agreed that death is simply part of life. Sometimes, we talked about what each of us wanted to have carved on our gravestones. Mike and Rodney both figured they would end up in their family's plot in the city cemetery. Charles usually leaned toward cremation. The two girls weren't quite so comfortable talking about such things, although I remember hearing Lorraine once mention she might like to be placed near one of her grandfathers. Gradually, it was John who began to carry the conversation. It was darkness itself that he was fascinated with. Way back in the past, he was saying, the night was a whole lot different than it is now. I don't think we can even relate to what it was like as much as we assume we can. These days, we have so much artificial light that the night isn't really that dark anymore. He paused to relight his pipe, and his face was distorted in the light of the flame. His eyes flashed. The pipe bowl glowed red, and he continued. All those old legends and stories they used to tell are pretty much just laughed at nowadays. Werewolves, vampires, will-o-wisps, all that kind of shit, you know? All those terrors of nighttime are kind of fading away. Ghost stories are good entertainment to a lot of people, but they've been told so many times, it's hard to take them seriously like people used to. A few generations ago, when night came down, it came down hard. It got dark, I mean really dark. People used oil lamps and maybe a few electric lights to light their houses. But outside, what little light there was came from the moon and stars. Can you imagine being able to even see the light of the stars nowadays? And if the sky was overcast, then they were just shit out of luck back then. They couldn't see at all outside. If you had to go to the outhouse, a little oil lantern was about all you had for light. All this ambient light we live with these days, we hardly seem to notice it anymore. City lights, towns, highways, guard lights, vehicles, factories. There's lights everywhere. Hell, even flashlights are getting brighter and brighter. Back then, you walked around at night in a small circle of light, not much brighter than a couple of candles. No wonder all those stories and legends about witches in the woods practicing satanic rituals, or witch doctors casting voodoo spells, or haunted graveyards, or whatever else sounded so serious and terrifying back then. We got vampire stories these days that make out to be some sort of superheroes. That ain't how people saw back then. Back in those days, they were what caused people to get nervous and fearful when it got dark. The faint cries of spirits and the high winds make people scramble to get back inside under shelter. The real, rational fear of wolves got magnified into pure terror at the thought of an animal who could hunt you with human intelligence and then sneak up to tear your throat out from behind. People would tell you not to follow those pale lights into the woods or swamps because you would be led to your death. I remember reading this Mexican legend about a guy who would show up in some lonely cantina late at night. He would dance with the women and drink with the men, and everybody would think he was pretty cool. Until sooner or later, someone would notice that his feet were actually cloven hooves, like a goat's. Then, he would somehow manage to slip out and be gone without anyone realizing he had left. The legend tells that the guy was really the devil. Tammy stirred at my side. You mean he disappeared? She asked. I don't know, John answered slowly. Maybe it was more like he was just hung around until everybody was real good and drunk. Or maybe they were too afraid to say to him after they noticed his feet, and he just slipped out. I don't know. I don't think I want to follow that dude in the dark anyway, would you? Charles elbowed me in the side gently. Maybe we gotta take this old boy out to Goatman Hill, bro, he said quietly. You sure you want to go out that far in the country tonight? I knew I was sounding like I was wimping out, but my head still didn't seem right. My own voice echoed in my mind. Why not? Charles persisted. We've seen and heard some pretty strange shit out here from time to time. Not really so strange, man. I mean, we always seem to get followed out of there when we leave, but that's probably just some hicks who own property out there. Come on, boy. You know damn well that ain't all that's happened to us out there. Charles was right. My lame little protests couldn't mask the facts. The fact was that things really happened on that old country road that couldn't be reasonably explained. Like the time Charles and I were riding with the brothers in Rodney's car, and when we rounded a corner at the base of the sheer limestone cliff face, I looked out the backseat window and saw a dim light coming down at us from high on the cliff. It moved like a flashlight in the hand of someone running toward us, yet no one could possibly have been running down that hill. It was an almost vertical outcropping of rock. All four of us, Charles, Mike, Rodney, and me, had seen it very clearly, and Rodney had promptly stomped on the gas and gotten us the hell out of there. A few days later, we went back in the bright daylight to be sure what the cliff looked like. It was definitely far too steep to stand on, let alone run down. We could see no trace of whatever had been there. I squirmed just a little on the tailgate, trying to figure out how to get out of going down there without losing face. Usually, I was more than willing to check out weird places that people told stories about. It was pretty good entertainment, especially when we had nothing else to do. But I felt like enough weird things had happened to me already that night. Man, I really don't feel like doing all that driving tonight, I said, trying to sound as tired as possible. But Charles wasn't about to let me off the hook that easily. He was pretty pumped about showing our new acquaintances a good time. That's cool, he shot back. You can drop your truck off back at your place, and you and Tammy can jump in with us. And you've been promising to take me out there, haven't you? Tammy chimed in, elbowing me in the side, and effectually removing any and all chance I may have had to argue any further. Guess I'm stuck then, huh? I managed to chuckle a bit, but it sounded rather forced. I had only one card left to play. But then again, we haven't heard from John or Cecilia. What do y'all think? John jumped right on it. We'll be right behind you. I'm always game for shit like this, man. And of course, Cecilia agreed with a giggle in the dark. Hell yeah, she said. Let's go. Mike and Rodney made it a unanimous decision, so we all rolled noisily out of the cemetery in a cloud of dust. Driving back on the old roads, I got the sensation that the road was moving much slower under me than the trees on each side. It was sort of tunnel vision effect that made it tough to focus on driving. By the time we reached my house, I was glad to drop my truck there and crowd into Charles's ranchero with him and Lorraine and Tammy. About 45 minutes later, we were all pulling into a small parking area near another cemetery that overlooked a wide valley. Around the old cemetery, a wrought iron fence had been built, and there were places in the fence where the uprights had been bent and twisted, as if something had forced its way through from the inside. We piled out and started passing more weed around while Charles filled the newcomers in on the stories we had heard about this place. This is Shiloh Cemetery, y'all. Everybody says the fence was torn up by Goatman. I don't know how it got done, and I am damn sure that I don't know anybody strong enough to bend that fence with their bare hands. They say Goatman got pissed because he wasn't buried inside the graveyard like everybody else. So he jumped inside and started knocking over tombstones and shit, and then just ripped his way back out through the fence. Looks to me like he must have done it more than once. This road goes down through the bottom of the valley. There's this little wooden bridge down there, and they say if you go down there and kill your car on the bridge and yell, "Goat Man," 3 times real loud, then he'll come a-running. We've done that plenty of times. He ain't never come a-running. Personally, I think he's a chicken shit. Laughter circulated the group. This road, continued Charles, is the only way in and out of this valley. It comes out about 5 miles on the other side. We've been followed out of here by some old beat-up truck quite a few times. I think it might be a Chevy, but it's hard to tell in the dark. Well, how about it? Y'all ready to go?